Hi guys, how are you today? After a hard-working day, let's relax with this journey through history. If you're as excited as we are to dive into this captivating journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more adventures into the past. Let's uncover the mysteries of the Middle Ages together. Hit that bell icon too, so you're always first in line for the next historical adventure. In the quiet stretches of history, there are moments that, in their stillness, seem to speak louder than the actions they represent. Among such moments, the way children were raised during the Victorian era offers us a subtle yet profound window into a time long past. A time where the lives of the young were shaped not by the affectionate tenderness that we might expect today, but by strictness and moral duty. At the heart of this era, there existed a belief that children were best kept in line with firm hands and unyielding structures. Their minds, still fresh and untarnished, were thought to be malleable, and thus they were often subjected to the whims of a system that viewed obedience as paramount. The Victorian child, then, was less a figure of innocence and more a figure to be trained, to be shaped into something more refined, more respectable, as determined by the standards of the time. The Victorian ideal. In the mid-1800s, when Queen Victoria sat at the helm of the British Empire, society's understanding of childhood was markedly different from what we may think of today. Children, regardless of their age, were seen as in need of discipline, not for the sake of nurturing or love, but for the sake of order. A well-behaved child was a reflection of a well-ordered society, and this order began in the home. Parents, particularly those from the middle and upper classes, adopted a philosophy of strictness. It was common for children to be instructed in the moral codes of duty, respect, and obedience. There was little room for the expression of personal desires or emotions. A child's wishes, needs, and comfort were secondary to their education and moral shaping. It was a time when love was often thought to be best expressed through the provision of proper guidance. And proper guidance was most certainly the kind that left no room for sentimentality. Children were expected to demonstrate obedience without question, respect for authority without protest, and the ability to carry themselves with the utmost decorum. There were no tears allowed for small failures or disappointments, for these were seen as signs of weakness, something to be overcome in due course. In fact, the ideal was that a child should, in the course of time, learn to repress their emotions in favor of cultivating virtues such as self-control and duty, discipline and authority. As we move through the quiet corridors of this historical moment, we find ourselves faced with the concept of discipline. The discipline of the Victorian child was not unlike a constant low hum in the background of everyday life. It was ever present, like the ticking of a clock that one could not ignore. Punishments were not swift or angry, but instead they were methodical and cold. Timeouts, grounding, or even corporal punishment were often employed as a means of shaping character. To the Victorians, this method of discipline was not only acceptable, but necessary for the child's growth. They believed that children, in their natural state, were unruly and needed correction. It was this correction, they felt, that would help mold a well-behaved individual who could later take on the responsibilities of adulthood with propriety. The idea was that a child's spirit, like a rough stone, needed to be chiseled down to create something worthy of society's gaze. As we reflect on these practices, it is interesting to note that the approach toward parenting was deeply tied to the broader social and moral expectations of the time. The Industrial Revolution, with its rise in the importance of efficiency, productivity, and order, shaped much of this thinking. In such an environment, the chaos of childhood was something to be regulated, not embraced, and so Victorian parents, often more concerned with maintaining order in the home than with understanding the emotional needs of their children, set out to raise a generation of children who would fit seamlessly into the highly structured society they inhabited. The long shadow of Victorian parenting. As time passed, the world began to change. The social structure, once so rigid and rooted in Victorian ideals, began to bend. new ideas about childhood and parenting began to emerge, shaped by the work of educators, psychologists, and social reformers who advocated for a more empathetic approach to child rearing. And yet, even as these new ideas took root, the legacy of Victorian parenting, with its emphasis on discipline, obedience, and emotional suppression, cast a long shadow. We now look back at those times with a sense of disquiet. The methods that once seemed so natural, so necessary, are now viewed through the lens of modern understanding. Today, we know that the emotional well-being of children is just as important as their moral and intellectual development. We recognize that love, patience, and kindness play a crucial role in raising a child, that they must feel secure and understood, rather than merely shaped into a mold of conformity. But even as we acknowledge these changes, we must reflect on the quiet persistence of these Victorian ideals in our own society. They are not entirely gone. They linger in subtle ways, influencing how we, as a culture, understand the role of authority in a child's life. In the calm of our reflection, we may find ourselves pondering the question, what is the proper balance between discipline and love? In a world that values both freedom and structure, how do we create a childhood that nurtures the full potential of a child, while also preparing them for the responsibilities of life? As we consider these questions, we might find that the answers are neither simple nor one-size-fits-all. But in that gentle pause, we are reminded that parenting, like history itself, is a process of continual evolution. In the next chapter, we will explore the ways in which Victorian parenting practices might be seen today, and why, with the passing of time, they have come to be considered not just outdated, but in many ways unlawful. But for now, let us sit quietly with the image of the Victorian child, so carefully shaped, so thoroughly disciplined, and wonder how they might feel in a world much different from the one they knew. Certainly. Here's Chapter 2. Analysing Victorian parenting methods in the same gentle, meditative tone as the first chapter, aligning with the style of Sleepless Historian. The content is split into 3 to 4 sections, following a calm and reflective pace, with slow transitions and a focus on a detailed historical overview. Analysing Victorian parenting methods. The role of authority in Victorian parenting. In the tranquil progression of time, we find ourselves revisiting the heart of Victorian parenting, authority. It is perhaps one of the most central themes of this era. Parenting in the 19th century was rooted firmly in the notion that children, though young and malleable, were to be shaped into proper citizens through rigorous discipline. The Victorian approach to parenting was not one of warmth or encouragement, but one of strict control, where children were expected to obey without question. Parents during this time were seen as the absolute authority figures in the household, and their role was to enforce a sense of order and respect. The child, in the eyes of society, was not to be an autonomous individual, but rather an entity that required guidance and correction. Parents did not view their children through the lens of affection, but through the lens of obligation. It was their duty to make sure their children grew up to be respectful, hard-working, and morally upright adults. While today we might associate parenting with nurturing and emotional support, Victorian parents were focused primarily on preparing their children for the responsibilities of adulthood. The emphasis on order and authority over affection reflected a broader social belief in structure, a belief that without control, chaos would follow. In many households, children were expected to be seen but not heard, and any deviation from the prescribed behavior was met with correction. The method of correction was often physical. A gentle tap with a cane or a ruler was a common form of discipline. It was thought that the body's discomfort would imprint the lesson upon the mind. This physical discipline was considered essential to the child's character formation. Parents believed that children, especially those from working-class backgrounds, would not develop proper character without the experience of suffering. While the Victorian model of authority and discipline may seem harsh by today's standards, it was seen as the natural order of things. The parent was the authority figure, and the child's role was to submit to this authority without protest. The tone of this parenting method was one of unyielding respect for authority, for tradition, and for duty. In a world where stability was essential, this respect was seen as the cornerstone of a successful society. The moral duty of the Victorian parent. In the Victorian era, moral education was considered just as important, if not more so, than academic learning. Parents believed that their role was to instill a strong sense of morality in their children. The idea was that a morally upright child would grow into a morally upright adult, contributing to a better society. This moral upbringing often meant that children were subjected to sermons on proper conduct, right versus wrong, and the virtues of hard work and respect. Children were taught early on to suppress their desires and to place duty above all else. Their happiness was seen as secondary to their obligation to society. It was not enough for children to simply learn how to read and write. They needed to understand the principles of morality that would guide their actions in adulthood. Many families, particularly in the upper classes, employed strict codes of conduct and manners, and children were expected to learn and adhere to these rules. One of the more notable aspects of Victorian parenting was its emphasis on the regulation of emotions. The Victorian ethos encouraged children to hide their feelings, viewing emotional restraint as a sign of maturity and character. Crying or outwardly expressing distress was often frowned upon. Children were taught to control their emotions, to present themselves with calm dignity in the face of adversity. This emphasis on emotional control extended beyond the family and into society at large. Children were taught to internalize their emotions, to conform to societal expectations of what was considered proper and dignified behavior. Any display of emotion that was not in line with social expectations, whether it was joy, sorrow, or anger, was often seen as a sign of weakness, something to be corrected or suppressed. As we reflect on this approach, we might find ourselves questioning its impact. Today, we recognize the importance of emotional intelligence in children's development. We understand that expressing one's feelings, when done in healthy ways, is essential to well-being. However, during the Victorian era, the focus was squarely on shaping children into individuals who could fit into the rigid framework of society, and emotional restraint was a key component of this process. The absence of physical affection. Unlike today, where affection is often shown through physical touch, a hug, a kiss, a gentle pat on the back, physical affection was notably absent from Victorian parenting. In many households, especially those in higher social classes, it was thought that children should not be indulged with affection, as it might make them soft or overly dependent. Victorian parents often kept their physical distance from their children. The act of hugging or holding a child was not common, as it was thought that such gestures would encourage weakness. Instead, the relationship between parent and child was more transactional, based on authority and duty, rather than warmth or affection. In fact, many Victorian parents saw affection as something that could make a child soft or undisciplined. There was a belief that children needed to be hardened, not coddled, to prepare them for the difficulties of life. Tenderness was not seen as something that could contribute to a child's character. Rather, it was viewed as something that could weaken their resolve. This lack of physical affection may seem difficult to understand from our current perspective, where emotional bonding and nurturing are seen as fundamental to a child's growth. However, in the Victorian world, the need for emotional fortitude was considered paramount. Parents believed that love, when shown too freely, could be a hindrance to a child's ability to survive in an unforgiving world. A quiet pause. As we sit with these thoughts, we might find ourselves contemplating the quiet distance between the parent and child in the Victorian era. In a time when emotions were controlled and affection was withheld, it is curious to wonder how children of the Victorian age perceived their relationship with their parents. Were they simply dutiful, or did they long for more affection, more understanding, more warmth? This reflection, slow and calm, invites us to question whether the balance of authority and love in parenting truly served the children of the time, or whether it, in some ways, stunted their emotional growth. We can also reflect on how far we have come since then. Parenting today places a high value on emotional well-being, on nurturing children's emotional intelligence, and on fostering an environment of love and support. Yet, as we turn our gaze back to the Victorian parent-child relationship, we can appreciate the gentle complexity of this historical approach. It was an era where parents acted with a sense of moral duty and responsibility, a time when affection was not seen as necessary for growth. But in the quiet spaces between these actions, we can begin to hear the faint echoes of a child's unmet need for love and tenderness. Contrasts between eras. The Victorian approach, order through discipline. As we reflect on the past, it becomes clear that the Victorian era was a time where order and structure were of paramount importance, particularly within the family. For many Victorian parents, a child's behavior was not just a matter of personal growth, but of societal duty. Children were not viewed as emotional beings to be nurtured and understood, but rather as blank slates, ready to be shaped by the firm hand of discipline. The Victorian understanding of childhood was grounded in a belief that children, by nature, were unruly and undisciplined. It was not only the role of parents, but their moral duty to impose order on their children, ensuring that they would grow into respectable, productive members of society. Love and affection were often secondary to this goal. Victorian parents were often more concerned with their children's obedience than with their emotional needs. A child's behavior was regarded as a reflection of the parent's capability, and a child's obedience was a sign of their upbringing's success. This intense focus on discipline was not limited to just curbing behavior. It was woven into the very fabric of a child's upbringing. Education, social etiquette, and moral character were all shaped by the rigorous rules imposed by the household. Children were expected to master self-control, to learn the importance of restraint, and to obey the rules without question. Love, though not absent, was often viewed as something that would come in due course, a reward for obedience, rather than an inherent right of childhood. The harmful effects of emotional suppression. When we look back on the Victorian approach, we can see that while it may have instilled discipline and respect for authority, it also left children with a significant emotional void. The lack of emotional validation, the absence of warmth in everyday interactions, and the constant pressure to conform to societal expectations created an environment where children's emotional needs were often neglected. Children were taught to suppress their emotions, and this emotional restraint became a cornerstone of their upbringing. A child crying, expressing sadness, or showing frustration was often met with correction rather than comfort. The Victorian worldview held that emotional expression, particularly negative emotions, was a sign of weakness. It was not uncommon for children to be instructed to pull themselves together or stop being silly when they exhibited feelings of distress. Emotions, especially sadness or anger, were seen as something to be overcome, not understood. The emotional cost of this approach became apparent as many of these children grew into adulthood. The lack of emotional support left many individuals struggling to understand their feelings and to connect with others on a deeper emotional level. These adults often found themselves ill-equipped to handle complex emotions, unable to express vulnerability, and unsure of how to manage their inner lives in a healthy way. This suppression of emotion, though it may have been intended to instill strength, instead often led to emotional repression. The children who grew up under such an upbringing did not have the opportunity to learn how to identify, process, or articulate their emotions. As they grew older, the absence of emotional education left them struggling to form fulfilling relationships, to communicate openly, and to understand their own emotional states. The modern approach: emotional validation and connection. In stark contrast to the Victorian method, modern parenting places a heavy emphasis on emotional validation and understanding. Today, it is recognized that children's emotions are not something to be suppressed, but rather something to be acknowledged and nurtured. Modern parents, unlike their Victorian counterparts, understand that emotional development is just as important as academic learning, and that fostering emotional intelligence is essential for a child's well-being. Modern parenting encourages children to express their emotions freely within healthy boundaries. It recognizes that feelings such as sadness, frustration, and anger are not signs of weakness, but natural responses to the world around them. Today, when a child feels upset, they are more likely to be comforted and supported in expressing their feelings. Parents are encouraged to listen attentively, to validate their child's emotions, and to offer guidance on how to manage those feelings. This shift in understanding marks a fundamental change in how we view childhood. Rather than seeing children as beings in need of strict control, they are now seen as individuals with complex emotional needs. The modern approach does not merely seek to control behavior, but to understand it. When children are encouraged to express their feelings, they are also taught how to handle them. They learn that their emotions are a natural part of their humanity, and that it is not only okay to feel, but important to recognize and manage those feelings as they grow. The benefits of this approach are profound. Children raised with emotional validation are better able to navigate their emotions as they grow older. They develop a deeper sense of self-awareness, and their emotional intelligence enables them to handle challenges with greater ease. These children also grow up with a more secure sense of self-worth, knowing that their emotions are valued and that they can express themselves without fear of judgment or punishment. The long-term benefits of modern parenting. Looking beyond the immediate effects of modern parenting, the long-term benefits are just as compelling. Children who grow up in emotionally supportive environments are more likely to develop healthy relationships as adults. They understand the importance of empathy, communication, and emotional honesty. They are able to form connections based on mutual respect and emotional understanding, rather than fear or obligation. In contrast, those raised in environments where emotions were suppressed may struggle with intimacy and emotional closeness. They may find it difficult to open up to others or to express their needs and desires. As adults, they may feel disconnected from their own emotions, leading to issues with mental health and interpersonal relationships. The emotional neglect that characterized Victorian parenting may have caused lasting harm, even if it was unintentional. The modern approach to parenting, however, encourages resilience. By acknowledging a child's emotions, parents give them the tools to handle the inevitable ups and downs of life. Instead of teaching children to suppress their feelings, modern parenting teaches them to process and work through them in a healthy, constructive manner. Children who grow up in emotionally validating environments are more likely to thrive in adulthood, able to manage both their emotional and social worlds with confidence. Moreover, this approach recognizes that parenting is not merely about shaping a child's behavior, but about nurturing their emotional health. It is a gentle, yet profound shift from the Victorian emphasis on control to a modern emphasis on care and connection. In this shift, we find not only the potential for emotional growth, but for the development of a more empathetic, connected society. Reflecting on the evolution of parenting. As we sit in quiet reflection, we recognize the vast difference between these two approaches. The Victorian era sought to shape children into models of obedience and moral virtue, often at the expense of their emotional health. The modern era, in contrast, seeks to nurture both the intellect and the emotions, ensuring that children grow up not only as responsible citizens, but as emotionally healthy individuals. Yet, as we consider these contrasts, we must also recognize the quiet persistence of past ideologies. Although emotional validation is now central to our understanding of parenting, traces of the Victorian model still linger. The tension between control and freedom, duty and emotional expression continues to influence how we raise children today. This quiet conflict, woven into the fabric of modern parenting, reflects the complexities of human development and our ongoing search for balance. In the end, as we continue to evolve our approach to parenting, we must remember that each generation brings with it the wisdom of the past, combined with new understanding and insights. The journey of parenting is, in many ways, a journey of learning, not only about how to shape the next generation, but about how to nurture and understand the emotional lives of our children. As we conclude this reflection, we may notice the subtle threads that connect these two parenting philosophies. The rigid discipline of the Victorian era, though long gone, still informs certain aspects of our parenting today. Yet, the modern emphasis on emotional intelligence, on the nurturing of the whole child, marks a profound shift in how we view childhood and human development. This slow evolution, unfolding quietly over time, is a testament to our growing understanding of the complexities of raising children. It is in this gentle balance between emotional support and structured discipline that we find the path forward for the next generation. Reflecting on the journey, from Victorian rigor to modern understanding. As we sit quietly at the end of this exploration, we find ourselves looking back on the long journey we have taken together. From the rigid methods of Victorian parenting to the nurturing embrace of modern techniques, we have observed a transformation, slow but profound, in the way we raise our children. This transformation reflects not only changes in parenting methods, but also changes in the way we understand childhood, emotions, and human development. The Victorian era, with its focus on discipline, obedience, and emotional suppression, seemed to cast a shadow of duty over childhood. Children were expected to fit into an ordered world, their behavior constantly shaped by correction and moral instruction. Love and affection, though not absent, were reserved for times when they had earned it through proper conduct. Parenting in this context was an exercise in creating citizens, not individuals. In stark contrast, modern parenting has placed a quiet emphasis on emotional well-being. Today, we recognize the importance of nurturing a child's emotional landscape, offering them the tools to understand and express their feelings. We no longer see children solely as subjects of discipline, but as individuals with complex emotional needs. This shift, while gradual, marks a significant change in how we approach the growth of a child, moving from a focus on control to a recognition of autonomy and emotional intelligence. Understanding the impact of emotional validation. As we reflect on this shift, we must acknowledge the profound effect it has had on children, both in the past and in the present. In the Victorian era, emotional suppression was a means of promoting self-control and moral uprightness. While it undoubtedly created a generation of disciplined, obedient individuals, it also left many with a deep sense of emotional distance. The inability to express one's feelings freely or to have those feelings validated often led to a suppression of the self, a distance that may have carried into adulthood. In contrast, the modern approach, with its emphasis on emotional validation, has nurtured a generation of children who are more comfortable with their feelings. Rather than seeing emotions as something to be hidden or ignored, we now understand that they are an essential part of who we are. This shift allows children to process their emotions in healthy ways, creating a foundation for emotional resilience and more meaningful relationships in adulthood. We see then that the emotional well-being of children is not a mere luxury, but a necessity for their overall development. Emotional validation allows children to grow not only intellectually, but also socially and emotionally. It enables them to develop empathy, resilience, and self-awareness, qualities that are essential for navigating the complexities of the world around them. The role of parenting in shaping future generations. It is here, in this quiet space of reflection, that we begin to understand the lasting impact of the way we choose to raise our children. Parenting, in its essence, shapes the future. It shapes how children perceive themselves and others, how they interact with the world, and how they build their relationships. The methods we use to raise children today will, in turn, influence the society of tomorrow. As we reflect on the Victorian model, we may wonder whether the methods of emotional suppression and strict discipline truly served the greater good. While they may have created a generation of individuals who respected authority and societal structures, they also left a legacy of emotional isolation. This isolation, though not always visible, has had its own quiet ripple effects. It has affected not only the individuals who grew up under these conditions, but also the relationships they formed, the communities they built, and the way they approached their own parenting. In contrast, the modern approach, one that values emotional intelligence and empathetic understanding, holds the potential for a more connected society. A society where individuals are taught to understand and articulate their feelings, to approach challenges with emotional resilience, and to engage with others in a way that fosters mutual respect and empathy. This shift, slow as it may have been, represents a quiet revolution in how we view the human experience. The ongoing evolution of parenting, a call to thoughtful reflection. As we reach the end of this gentle journey, we are invited to pause and reflect on where we stand today. Parenting continues to evolve, with each generation bringing new insights, new challenges, and new opportunities. Yet even as we embrace the modern understanding of childhood, one that emphasizes emotional validation, respect for autonomy, and gentle guidance, we must also acknowledge the subtle remnants of the past. The legacy of Victorian parenting still lingers, not in the form of harsh discipline, but in the quiet expectations we sometimes place on our children. We may still find ourselves caught between the desire for control and the desire to nurture. The tension between these two impulses, between structure and emotional freedom, continues to shape our parenting choices. It is not a battle, but a balancing act, one that requires careful thought, reflection, and understanding. In this space of balance, we are called to consider how we might continue to evolve our approach to parenting. As we move forward, let us reflect on the lessons of the past, acknowledging the ways in which they have shaped us, while also embracing the lessons of the present. Parenting is not a static endeavor. It is a process of growth and learning, much like the children we raise. Moving forward, embracing a holistic approach. As we consider the ways in which parenting continues to evolve, it is clear that a holistic approach is necessary. A holistic approach that not only nurtures the intellectual and physical development of children, but also recognizes the importance of their emotional and social growth. This approach invites us to see children not as vessels to be filled with knowledge or obedience, but as individuals with their own needs, desires, and feelings. We must ask ourselves, how can we support the emotional growth of children in ways that allow them to flourish as compassionate, self-aware individuals? How can we create an environment where children are free to express themselves, yet still understand the importance of responsibility and respect for others? This is the question that we, as parents, caregivers, and members of society, must continue to reflect upon as we move forward. The path ahead is not without its challenges, but it is also full of promise. The promise of a generation raised with emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and the ability to connect with others in meaningful ways. As we reflect on the history of parenting, we are reminded that the choices we make today will shape the children of tomorrow. Let us then move forward with intention, with care, and with a deep understanding of the impact our parenting has, not just on our children, but on the world they will inherit. This is the quiet call to action, a call to nurture, to listen, and to be present in the lives of the children entrusted to our care. As we conclude this reflection, we recognize that parenting, like history itself, is an ongoing journey. It is a journey that invites us to look back and learn from the past, while also looking forward with hope and understanding. The methods we choose to raise our children today will ripple through generations, shaping not only their lives, but the fabric of society itself. In this gentle, slow unfolding of time, we find that the balance between structure and emotional validation is the key to fostering a generation of children who are not only well-disciplined, but emotionally connected, resilient, and compassionate. Let us take this understanding forward with quiet intention and thoughtful reflection, knowing that in the care we give to our children, we shape the future in subtle yet profound ways. Thank you for joining us. Rest well, take care of your beautiful self, whatever that means to you, and until next time, good night.